Hey everybody, welcome to today's show. Welcome to Advocate Information Highway. I'm your host, Anthony Lorito-Duke, and we have a great topic for today's show in which we are discussing about the two books that I wrote. And for a long time, people have been asking me to discuss about them. And, unfortunately, I have put it off for quite a long time, but I'm going to do that today. And there's two books that I wrote in which the first one is called Let's Talk About It. And the second book that I wrote is called Let's Talk About It More. And the first book that I wrote this back in 2012. And as you can see, it's not a thick, long story book. It's very, very simple read. Um, it's very easy to go through this. And in this book, I discussed about a lot of the work that I've done as an advocate over the years, and in the first chapter, I discussed about animal rights and how I am an animal rights activist, and I discussed about the companies that I worked together with for so many years, how I've gotten laws passed for animal rights, and how, the companies and organizations I joined together with. And so I discussed about that. The second chapter is LGBT rights. As a gay man myself, as a feminine gay man myself, um, over the years I have fought for LGBT rights, and I've joined together with a lot of organizations and stuff like that. I've done a lot of work with politicians, and I helped to get a lot of laws passed. Um, Even in the uh, borough that I live in, I I was one of the many, 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 many people that helped to even open up the very first LGBT center here in the borough that I live in. And many years ago, I worked and marched in the very, very first LGBT Pride Parade in the borough that I live in. Because for many, many years, the borough that I live in has been very homophobic. And so a lot of things have changed for the better. I mean, there's a lot more work to go, but I discussed about my work to help uh, LGBT people and to help get a lot of benefits for them. And I even worked with a lot of government officials to help pass marriage equality. So I discussed about that too. In the third chapter, I discussed about the rights for people with disabilities, and I worked with many organizations and politicians, and I helped to get a lot of laws passed for that as well. And I discussed about the work that I did for that. The fourth chapter is how to deal with government agencies. Well, I discussed about my experiences with a lot of government agencies and uh, uh, the pros and the cons with that. And um, I even included like social government agencies like Social Security uh, and other agencies, and how I fought against them for so many years when they were doing wrong by me, and all the work that I had to do to get things resolved. And I helped reform the social service system. And I worked together with a lot of politicians way back then. And so I discussed about that. Uh, the fifth chapter is how to get politicians to work for you. Okay, in which I discussed the levels of politics as well. A lot of people don't know these things, so I put it out there and um, discussed about how I worked together with a lot of politicians, and you guys could do the same too. And I discussed about how you could do that. I gave my experience, and maybe you guys can follow that same pattern. Um, the sixth chapter, which is how to get proper health coverage and providers. I have I did a lot of work with that. For the agencies that I worked for, I helped a lot of people to get on proper health coverage. I helped them to choose the doctors that they would need and like and stuff like that. And You guys can do the same thing. This is basically uh, general work that I have done, and I discussed this very briefly. Even though this is a very thin book, I still packed a lot of information into these things. And a lot of people don't believe that. They're like, how could you put so much information to just 2 or 3 pages in a chapter? You wouldn't believe how I did it, but I did it. And you guys could do the same thing. You can read about this and uh, see the work that I've done, and maybe you guys could follow the same pattern. The seventh chapter is how to deal with providers that do not do their jobs properly. We've all gone through this, and I basically discussed about um, my experiences about dealing with providers, the good and the bad side. And for the bad side, I discussed about how I dealt with them in a proper manner. Uh, the eighth chapter is medications, money for doctors, hospitals, and pharmacists. That says it in a nutshell, but I just basically broke it down for you in that chapter. And so people can see it for themselves when they're reading it. And so, but it's basically a rundown, it's a breakdown, of how that happens. The ninth chapter, which is the final chapter, I discussed about building up the body and the mind. You want to really stay healthy, you got to build up the body and the mind together. And a lot of people don't realize that the mind is just as important as the body. So, and they're like, uh, how do you build up the mind? Discussed it in this book. Now, let's get into the second book that I wrote, which is called Let's Talk About It More. I wrote this book, and again, it's a very thin book. It's not a thick, long storybook, right? And I wrote this book back in 2014, 2 years after I wrote the first book. And in this book, I discussed about the work that I've done over the years, the work that I've done in entertainment. Um, I discussed about the work that I've done with working with government agencies on how to help to fix the broken education system. I'm not a teacher. I'm saying that up front, but I have worked with a lot of politicians over the years to help try to improve the broken education system. And the third chapter, I discussed about business. The fourth chapter, I discussed about women's rights. The fifth chapter, I discussed about immigration reform. The sixth chapter, I discussed about housing. And the seventh chapter, I discussed about the economy. And because I am a business person, so I spoke about my experience in business, um, and how I even brought down some major companies that were really doing wrong by people, and um, they thought that they were untouchable. And you know, I showed them that they were not untouchable, and I did it the legal right way. And um, I I helped to help people. I helped to bring down the a lot of the bad businesses, and I helped to build up the good businesses. And I discussed about that in that chapter. In the fourth chapter, I discussed about women's rights. And as a feminine gay man myself, I mean, I'm not a female, but I have worked together with a lot of women's rights organizations, and I help pass bills to help protect women's rights. And that's why I discussed in a prior episode. I discussed about how I'm 50-50 with the abortion, and um, but I helped to build up a lot of women's rights, to in many ways. So I discussed about the organizations I joined together with to help do that. The fifth chapter, immigration reform. Again, I worked with a lot of government agencies to try to help improve this, and it is a broken system, and I try to help reform that. And I discussed about the work that I've done with a lot of politicians over the years to try to help reform that. Even in the sixth chapter with housing, I worked with a lot of agencies and politicians to help try to improve housing because one of the biggest problems in this country, a lot of states, is housing, proper housing, and there's still a lot more work to do with that. But I discussed about the work that I have done with a lot of organizations and politicians to try to help improve that. So I discussed it briefly in that chapter. And in the last chapter, the seventh chapter, I discussed about economy. And in this chapter, and like I said, I wrote this book back in 2014, which was quite a few years ago. And in this chapter, I discussed about a lot of the work that I've done with government agencies and to try to help fix climate control, gun reform, FEMA camps, and problems with police and having martial law. And um, it's weird that the people that told me many, many years ago, when I first wrote this book, a lot of people thought that I was stupid and crazy for writing this book and discussing about these things. Like climate control, gun control, police reform. And they thought that I was really nuts about writing this. And I did. I even basically wrote about it. You could see it. And um, I discussed about the work that I've been trying to do with a lot of politicians and stuff to help to do this reform, to do these reforms. And um, they thought that I was really nuts. And they were talking bad about me and about, oh, that's stupid to do. And now look, this was back in 2014 that I wrote this, right? And people thought that I was really stupid for and nuts to write about this. And look at today's society. Look at it. People are talking about proper gun control reform, right? Proper police reform, climate change. I was really stupid back then to discuss about this. And lo and behold, look what's going on in today's society. So, and those people, I've met up with a lot of those people that made fun of me from way back then and were calling me names and stuff like that and thought that I was stupid and crazy for writing about this stuff. And I said, hey, how you doing? And they would smile and I would smile back at them. And I would always bring up, remember when you made fun of me back then and call me all sorts of names back then for what I wrote? And they would all bend their head down in shame and walk away. And I'm like, oh, really? Hmm. You're not laughing anymore. You're not laughing anymore. Why? Because now they look stupid. So karma is a son of a bitch, ain't it? But anyways, um, I want to remind all my fans out there, those of you that are watching and listening to this show, please do not forget to hit the subscribe button. Please, I'd really appreciate that. And don't forget to go to my website, Advocate Information Highway, and the link to there is awldny.com. Again, that's awldny.com. And you guys can check out all the pages on there. And if you go to the store page of the website, you'll see the links to where you can purchase both of my books. And so you guys should check all that stuff out. And I hope to speak to everybody again on Friday. And so with that, take care, everybody. Bye.